This story left me speechless. I was accused of a crime I didn't commit, and my family and wife were against me. It destroyed me. I always believed I had the perfect family. Our home was a sanctuary of love and trust, where every evening was spent sharing stories around the dinner table, and weekends were dedicated to family outings. My wife, Emma, and I had built a life together over a decade, filled with laughter, mutual respect, and a deep bond that seemed unbreakable. We had 2 children, Sarah and Luke, who were the lights of our lives, and our days revolved around their happiness and well-being. We were the kind of family that friends envied. Our neighbors often commented on how harmonious we seemed, and it wasn't uncommon for us to be referred to as the perfect couple. Little did I know, the foundations of my seemingly perfect life were about to be shaken to their core. What started as a normal day was destined to become the beginning of a nightmare that would test every bond one held dear. It began with a knock on the door late one evening, just as we were settling down to watch a movie. 2 police officers stood on our porch, their expressions grave. They asked to speak with me privately, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Emma's eyes widened with concern as I stepped outside with them. The words they spoke felt surreal. I was being accused of embezzling funds from my company, a crime that had apparently been under investigation for months. I couldn't fathom what they were saying. My mind raced to every corner of my professional life, searching for any semblance of truth in their allegations. But there was none. I was innocent, yet the evidence they claimed to have was damning. As they placed me under arrest, my world began to crumble. Back inside, Emma stood frozen in the doorway, watching in horror. The look of betrayal on her face as the officers led me away was something I would never forget. The confusion and shock soon turned into a nightmare that neither of us had ever imagined facing. As the police car pulled away from our home, the reality of my situation began to sink in. The flashing lights reflected off the windows of our house, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I felt a surge of panic and disbelief. How could this be happening to me? I had always been meticulous with my work, ensuring that every transaction was legitimate and transparent. The notion that I could be accused of such a heinous act was unfathomable. At the police station, the questions came rapid fire. I answered as best as I could, denying every accusation with fervent honesty, but their faces remained stony and unconvinced. The hours dragged on, and by the time they allowed me to make a phone call, it was past midnight. Emma's voice on the other end was cold and distant, a stark contrast to the warm, comforting tone I had always known. She simply said, "How could you," before hanging up, leaving me in a suffocating silence. I was placed in a holding cell, the cold, hard bench my only comfort. My mind replayed the evening's events over and over, searching for any clue, any hint of how this nightmare had begun. Exhaustion eventually overcame me, but even in sleep, there was no escape. I dreamt of the accusing faces of my colleagues, the disappointment in Emma's eyes, and the terrifying uncertainty of what lay ahead. Part 4, Family Reaction. The next morning, I was released on bail, but the damage had already been done. When I walked through the front door of our home, I was met not with relief but with a cold, accusing silence. Emma stood in the living room, arms crossed, her eyes red from a night of tears. Our children were nowhere to be seen, likely shielded from the unfolding drama. Emma's voice trembled as she confronted me, demanding to know the truth. Each word felt like a dagger to my heart. Despite my fervent denials, she seemed to waver between disbelief and anger. The weight of her disappointment was unbearable. The trust we had built over years of marriage was shattered in an instant, replaced by suspicion and doubt. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. My parents, who had always been my pillars of support, were equally devastated. My father's stern expression conveyed his disappointment, while my mother's eyes were filled with sorrow. They had always seen me as their pride and joy, the son who could do no wrong. Now, they looked at me as if I were a stranger. Conversations that were once filled with warmth and laughter were now replaced with awkward, stilted exchanges, and I felt the weight of their judgment in every silent moment. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Emma grew increasingly distant, her trust in me eroding with each passing day. One evening, as we sat in the kitchen, she finally voiced what I had feared the most. "I think it's best if you move out for a while," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For the kids' sake, and for mine." Her words hit me like a freight train. I pleaded with her to reconsider, to trust that I was innocent, but she had made up her mind. The look in her eyes was one of someone who had been hurt beyond repair. She wasn't just protecting herself and our children, she was distancing herself from the man she believed might have betrayed their trust. Packing my bags was one of the hardest things I've ever done. As I walked out the door, Sarah and Luke watched from the top of the stairs, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. I wanted to run to them, to hold them and promise that everything would be okay, but I couldn't. Emma stood in the doorway, arms crossed, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and closed the door behind me. I felt a chasm open up between us, one that seemed impossible to bridge. Finding a place to stay on such short notice was challenging, but a friend offered me his guest room. It was a far cry from the warmth and familiarity of my home. The walls felt cold, and the silence was deafening. My thoughts were a constant whirlwind of fear, anger, and sadness. I felt like a ghost, existing in a space that was not truly mine. Days turned into weeks, and my isolation grew more profound. Friends and colleagues, once a source of camaraderie, now kept their distance. The stigma of the accusation clung to me like a shadow, affecting every aspect of my life. Phone calls went unanswered, and text messages were left unread. The loneliness was crushing, exacerbated by the glaring absence of my family's support. The worst part was the weekends. I used to cherish those days spent with Emma and the kids. Now, they were endless stretches of time filled with nothing but my thoughts. I missed the sound of Sarah's laughter, the way Luke would run into my arms after school, and the quiet moments with Emma after the kids had gone to bed. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, to a life that was no longer mine. The isolation was not just physical, it was an emotional exile that left me questioning everything I had ever believed about trust, loyalty, and love. Determined to clear my name, I threw myself into the battle for justice. I hired a reputable lawyer, who believed in my innocence and vowed to uncover the truth. We began a meticulous review of every piece of evidence the prosecution had against me. It was a painstaking process, but it was the only way to prove my innocence. I spent countless hours gathering documents, contacting potential witnesses, and piecing together the events that led to the accusation. Every step forward felt like a small victory, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. My lawyer discovered discrepancies in the financial records, suggesting that the embezzlement might have been orchestrated by someone else within the company. This revelation was a significant breakthrough, but we still had a long way to go. Meanwhile, I tried to maintain contact with Emma and the kids. I called every evening, even though most calls ended in brief, strained conversations. I sent letters to Sarah and Luke, hoping to remind them of my love and to reassure them that I was fighting to come back to them. Emma's responses were curt and infrequent, but I understood her hesitance. Trust had been broken, and it would take more than words to mend it. The struggle to prove my innocence was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Every day felt like a battle against an unseen enemy, one who had already convinced the world of my guilt. My lawyer and I faced numerous setbacks, key witnesses were reluctant to come forward, and crucial documents seemed to disappear or be deliberately misplaced. Financial strain added to the stress. Legal fees mounted, and without my job, money was tight. I took on odd jobs to make ends meet, but they were a far cry from my previous position and did little to alleviate the mounting pressure. The weight of the situation bore down on me, eroding my spirit and testing my resilience. Emma's visits with the kids were infrequent and supervised. Each visit was a bittersweet reminder of what I had lost. Sarah and Luke seemed to grow more distant with each meeting, their eyes filled with confusion and hurt. I tried to explain, to reassure them, but it was difficult when their own mother doubted me. Emma remained guarded, her demeanor a mix of sorrow and suspicion. The struggle was not just against the legal system, but against the creeping despair that threatened to overwhelm me. Amid the turmoil, my mind often drifted back to happier times. I remembered our family vacations to the beach, where Sarah and Luke would build sandcastles while Emma and I watched, hand in hand, basking in the sun and our love for each other. Those moments felt like a lifetime ago, yet they were what I clung to in my darkest hours. I recalled our wedding day, the way Emma's eyes sparkled with joy as we exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other through thick and thin. That promise now felt like a cruel irony. Our life had been filled with so much laughter and love, it was hard to reconcile that with the cold, distant person she had become. I wondered if she, too, thought of those times and whether they brought her any comfort or if they only deepened her sense of betrayal. Then there were the simple, everyday moments that I missed the most, reading bedtime stories to the kids, Sunday morning pancakes, and the warmth of our home during the holidays. Those flashbacks were a double-edged sword. They provided solace, reminding me of what I was fighting for, but also intensified the pain of my current reality. Each memory was a reminder of the life I was desperate to reclaim, a life that seemed so distant yet so achingly close. Despite the overwhelming challenges, there were moments of hope that buoyed my spirits. My lawyer uncovered new evidence that pointed away from me and towards a former colleague who had recently left the company under suspicious circumstances. This discovery bolstered our case and provided a glimmer of hope that justice might prevail. Support also emerged from unexpected quarters. A few loyal friends stood by my side, offering moral support and assistance with legal fees. Their unwavering belief in my innocence provided a much-needed lifeline amidst the storm. Even though my interactions with Emma remained strained, I held on to the hope that she, too, would eventually see the truth. In the midst of the legal battles and personal turmoil, I found strength in knowing that I was not alone in this fight. The small victories, however fleeting, reminded me that I was capable of weathering this storm and emerging stronger on the other side. Months dragged by as the legal proceedings continued. The courtroom became a battleground of conflicting testimonies and painstakingly dissected evidence. Each day felt like a test of endurance, but I remained steadfast in my determination to prove my innocence. Finally, a breakthrough came. A crucial witness came forward with testimony that corroborated our theory that the embezzlement had indeed been orchestrated by my former colleague. The evidence was compelling enough to cast doubt on the prosecution's case against me. In a tense courtroom scene, the judge announced the verdict, not guilty. The weight that had burdened me for so long lifted in an instant. Tears streamed down my face as the realization sank in: I was free. The accusations that had torn my family apart and shattered my life were finally laid to rest. Emma and I stood in the courtroom, our eyes meeting for the first time in months. There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, a glimmer of the love and trust we had once shared. It was a fragile moment, but it held the promise of reconciliation and healing. Outside the courthouse, I embraced Sarah and Luke, holding them close as if to make up for lost time. Their smiles, tentative yet filled with hope, mirrored my own. The road ahead would not be easy, but we would walk it together, rebuilding what had been broken and cherishing the newfound strength in our bonds. The aftermath of the trial brought a mix of relief and lingering scars. While the legal battle was won, the emotional wounds ran deep. Rebuilding trust with Emma and the children was a slow and delicate process. There were moments of joy and laughter, but also moments of painful silence and unspoken regrets. Emma and I attended counseling together, seeking to heal the rift that had torn us apart. It was a journey of rediscovery, of learning to communicate honestly and openly again. We confronted our fears and insecurities, acknowledging the damage that had been done while striving to move forward, hand in hand. As time passed, our family began to find its rhythm once more. Sarah and Luke gradually welcomed me back into their lives, their forgiveness a testament to the resilience of childhood innocence. We celebrated milestones together, cherishing each moment as a gift that had once seemed out of reach. Looking back on that dark chapter of my life, I am reminded of the fragility of trust and the strength of love. The experience tested me in ways I never imagined, but it also taught me about resilience, perseverance, and the unwavering support of those who believe in justice and truth. Today, our family is stronger than ever, bound together by the scars of the past and a renewed commitment to cherish every moment we share. The shadows of doubt have been replaced by a newfound appreciation for the simple joys of everyday life, and for the enduring power of love to overcome even the darkest of trials.